The room is quiet except for the scratching of a pen. A woman kneels before an altar, the smell of wax and incense thick in the air. The stone beneath her knees is cold. Her hands tremble, though she tries to steady them. Two men watch from across the chamber. They are not priests, one of them writes. He isn't recording her words. She hasn't spoken yet. He's watching her breathe, the rise and fall of her chest, the way her fingers curl around the rosary, the pause between each blink. A note appears in the margin of a ledger. Subject exhibits irregular respiration during prayer. Another note follows seconds later. Tremor observed in right hand when approaching the crucifix. The woman does not know what they're writing, but every movement of her body is becoming evidence. And by the time she finally speaks, it will already be too late. Because the men in this room believe something dangerous. They believe that the human body cannot hide the truth. They believe that guilt lives in the flesh, and that, if they watch long enough, the body will confess. The story of the Spanish Inquisition is usually told as a story about torture. Iron racks, burning stakes, screaming prisoners, but the machinery of the Inquisition did not run primarily on fire. It ran on observation. Long before executions, before confessions, before trials even began, the Inquisition watched. It watched carefully, systematically, relentlessly. And what it watched most closely were bodies. To understand why, we have to step backward into a world where faith was not just belief, it was identity. In late 15th century Spain, the Catholic monarchy faced a problem that terrified rulers across Europe. Thousands of Jews and Muslims had converted to Christianity. Some converted willingly, others did so under pressure, violence, or fear. On paper they were Christians, but suspicion lingered. What if these converts still practiced their old religions in secret? What if entire communities were pretending? The Spanish crown and the church feared something they believed could destroy the unity of their kingdom. Hidden belief, invisible disloyalty. So in 1478, a new institution was authorized to confront that fear. A tribunal unlike anything Europe had seen before. The Spanish Inquisition. Its official purpose was simple: protect the purity of Christian faith. But the Inquisition faced a problem that haunted it from the beginning. Belief cannot be seen. A person can speak the right prayers, attend the right ceremonies, confess the right sins, and still believe something else entirely. The Inquisition needed a way to uncover hidden truth, so it began searching somewhere else. Not in words, in bodies. The idea was not as strange as it might sound today. For centuries, scholars believed that emotions and spiritual states physically shaped the body. A sincere believer, they argued, would react differently to sacred things than a false one. True devotion should produce visible responses. Tears during prayer, trembling before holy symbols, a racing heart during confession. These reactions were interpreted as signs that the soul had been touched by divine truth, and if those signs were absent, something was wrong. At first, the idea was informal. Inquisitors simply paid attention to how suspects behaved during questioning. But over time, something unusual began to happen. Observation turned into procedure. Procedure turned into method, and method turned into something that looked increasingly like science. Inquisition tribunals began keeping detailed records of how suspects physically reacted to religious rituals. Not just what they said, how they moved, how they cried, how their voices sounded. In some tribunals, notaries documented the smallest changes in posture during prayer. How often a suspect blinked while looking at a crucifix, how quickly they kissed a Bible, whether their hands trembled when touching holy objects. It became common practice to delay questioning for hours, sometimes days. During that time, officials simply watched. The theory was simple. A liar can control their words, but controlling the body is harder. Eventually, the truth would surface. At least, that's what the Inquisition believed. But belief is a powerful thing. powerful enough to shape the way evidence is interpreted, powerful enough to turn uncertainty into certainty. Inside the tribunals, the observation of bodies slowly evolved into a strange and meticulous system. In some cities, physicians were invited to assist inquisitors. Their job was not to treat prisoners, their job was to measure them. Heartbeats were counted during prayer, sweat was noted during questioning, tears were studied during confession. When a suspect reacted correctly to religious symbols, it was recorded as a sign of genuine faith. When they didn't, suspicion deepened. Over time, these observations accumulated. Pages of notes, rows of measurements, entire archives filled with descriptions of human behavior under religious pressure. To the inquisitors, it began to feel like data, patterns, evidence, proof that the body could reveal what the mind concealed. But the deeper they looked, the more complicated the truth became. Because bodies do not behave in predictable ways. Fear changes breathing. Exhaustion alters emotion. People cry for reasons that have nothing to do with faith, and sometimes they don't cry at all. Yet inside the tribunals, ambiguity rarely weakened belief. Instead, it created something more dangerous: interpretation. If a suspect wept too easily, their tears could be called theatrical. If they didn't weep, their lack of emotion could be called suspicious. If their hands trembled, it might be guilt. If they remained calm, it might be deception. Every reaction could be explained, and every explanation pointed in the same direction: guilt. The system did not require certainty, it required interpretation, and interpretation always had somewhere to go. This was particularly true for women. By the 16th century, women made up a significant portion of those investigated by the Inquisition. Not necessarily because they committed more religious offences, but because inquisitors believed women's bodies revealed spiritual states more clearly. The belief was rooted in older ideas about emotion and morality. Women were thought to be more physically expressive, more prone to tears, more visibly affected by guilt and devotion, which meant that their bodies were treated like open books, books that inquisitors believed they could read. And once the Inquisition decided that the body could reveal hidden belief, every gesture became meaningful. A hesitation before touching the cross, a steady voice during confession, a calm expression while reciting prayers. All of it could be examined, measured, judged. The accused often didn't even know what the tribunal was looking for. That was part of the system. Uncertainty created pressure, and pressure produced behaviour that seemed revealing. People tried to perform faith. They practiced crying, practiced trembling, practiced speaking with the right tone of remorse. Families warned each other about how to behave during interrogation, how to react during Mass, how to avoid looking suspicious. But performance is fragile, and the more someone tries to control their behaviour, the more unnatural it can appear. Inquisitors were trained to notice that too. A confession delivered too smoothly might seem rehearsed. A display of emotion that came too quickly might feel artificial. Even genuine grief could be interpreted as manipulation. There was always another explanation, another interpretation, another reason to doubt. Inside this system, the body became something dangerous. A person could say the right words, confess the right sins, proclaim the right faith, but if their physical reactions did not align with expectations, suspicion remained. And suspicion could become judgment. Judgment could become sentence. Sentence could become spectacle, because punishment in the Inquisition was not always hidden. Some executions were public ceremonies. Crowds gathered in city squares to watch. Authorities read the crimes aloud. Prayers were spoken. Sentences delivered. These events were meant to reinforce the power of the institution, to demonstrate what happened when hidden belief was uncovered. But they also served another purpose. They reminded everyone watching that the body itself could betray them, that their own emotions, their own reactions, might one day be scrutinized. Under that kind of pressure, people change. They begin to monitor themselves, to regulate their own expressions, their own gestures, their own tears. Fear moves inward, and when fear moves inward, control becomes easier. The Inquisition did not need to watch everyone all the time. It only needed people to believe they might be watched. That belief spread through families, neighborhoods, entire communities. Stories circulated about what inquisitors looked for, how suspects were evaluated, what reactions were considered suspicious. Over generations, people learned to guard not just their words, but their bodies, and that may have been the most powerful effect of the system. It transformed belief into performance, faith into choreography, emotion into evidence. Yet over time, cracks appeared in the logic behind it all. Some inquisitors privately acknowledged a troubling reality. Physical reactions did not consistently reveal hidden belief. Different people responded differently to stress, fear, and ritual. There was no reliable pattern, but the system had already been built. Manuals written, procedures established. Institutions rarely dismantle methods that reinforce their authority, even when those methods are uncertain. So observation continued, ledgers continued to fill, and lives continued to be shaped by interpretations of human behavior that were often impossible to prove or disprove. Eventually, centuries later, the Spanish Inquisition faded into history. Political change, intellectual movements, and shifting attitudes toward religion slowly dismantled the institution. Officially, it ended in the 19th century. But the ideas behind it did not disappear so easily. The belief that truth hides in the body has resurfaced many times in history. In different places, under different names, systems designed to measure honesty through physiological responses, technologies that promise to reveal hidden intentions, scientific language attached to methods that claim the body cannot lie. Each generation believes its tools are more advanced, more precise, more objective. Yet the underlying question remains the same. Can human behavior truly reveal what someone believes? Or are we simply interpreting bodies through the lens of our own expectations? The Inquisition believed it had discovered a path to hidden truth. What it actually created was something else. A system where uncertainty became evidence, where interpretation became authority, and where the smallest human reaction could carry enormous consequences. For the people living under that system, survival often meant learning something difficult. How to perform normalcy, how to regulate emotion, how to make the body appear innocent, not necessarily by changing belief, but by changing behavior. And that may be the quietest legacy of the Inquisition. Not just the trials or the punishments, but the atmosphere it created. A world where people learned to watch themselves as carefully as the authorities watched them. To measure their own gestures, their own expressions, their own tears. History often remembers institutions through their most dramatic moments. The trials, the executions, the spectacle. But power is not always loud. Sometimes it operates quietly, in rooms where people are simply being observed, where every movement is recorded, where the body itself becomes a piece of testimony, and where the line between truth and interpretation slowly disappears. If stories like this matter to you, if understanding the hidden mechanics of history changes the way you see the present, consider subscribing for more deeply researched historical documentaries. And if there's a figure, event, or mystery from history you think deserves a closer look, share it in the comments. Because sometimes the most revealing parts of the past are not the events we already know, but the systems we almost overlooked.